Relax. Everything starts in your mind. The battlefield that has been destroying your life is not outside you. It has always been between your ears, and most people never even notice the war being fought there. Not the war between you and your circumstances. Not the war between you and the difficult people in your life. Not the war between you and the economy or the culture or the unfairness of the specific hand you were dealt. The war between you and your own thinking. Between the version of reality your mind is constructing minute by minute and the version of reality that would be available to you if you had ever been given, or had ever given yourself, the tools to think differently. Because here is the truth that the Stoics stated with such blinding clarity that it has been quoted and referenced and built upon for 2,500 years without being improved upon. It is not things that disturb us. It is our judgments about things. Not what happens, what we decide what happens means. Not the event, the interpretation, not the circumstance. The story the mind tells about the circumstance before the ink of the circumstance has even dried. And if the story is the source of the experience, if what your mind constructs about what is happening determines the quality of your experience of what is happening, then the most radical and the most liberating thing available to you is not the changing of your circumstances. It is the changing of your mind. The examination, the retraining, the genuine, deep, philosophically grounded restructuring of the thinking patterns that are currently constructing your experience. That is what relax means in the deepest Stoic sense. Not the shallow relaxation of distraction, the temporary relief of a mind that has been given something else to occupy it for a while. Not the performance of calm over the top of a mind that is still churning underneath the surface presentation. The genuine, settled, completely real relaxation of a mind that has learned to see clearly, to see what is actually happening rather than what its fear or its history or its unexamined habits are constructing as happening. To respond to what is real rather than to the story about what is real. To inhabit the actual present moment rather than the anxious anticipation of a future that has not arrived, or the ruminating replay of a past that cannot be changed. Today on the Stoic Mindset, we are going into the complete architecture of what it means for everything to start in your mind, and exactly how to build the mind from which the best possible version of your life can actually begin. There was a Greek physician named Galen of Pergamon, one of the most influential medical figures in all of ancient history, whose understanding of human anatomy and physiology shaped medical practice for over 1,000 years, who was famous not just for his medical knowledge, but for a specific quality of his personal bearing that his contemporaries found remarkable enough to record. Galen had a temper, not a small one. By his own account, and he was characteristically honest about it, he was given in his youth to violent outbursts of anger that he was not proud of, and that produced, in the relationships and the circumstances around him, consequences he consistently regretted. He was brilliant. He was prolific. He was one of the most intellectually distinguished figures of his era.
And he was, by his own honest assessment, regularly undone by the specific, familiar, completely unnecessary suffering that an unexamined and ungoverned mind produces. The transformation began, and this is the detail that was preserved and passed down because it was so specific and so instructive, not with a dramatic event, but with a single observation. Galen noticed one day, watching an older physician he deeply admired, that the man's inner state appeared to be completely independent of what was happening around him. A patient died, and the physician grieved, genuinely and honestly, but did not unravel. A colleague said something insulting, and the physician responded with a measured clarity that neither suppressed the response nor was swept away by it. An unexpected complication arose in the middle of a procedure, and the physician addressed it with the specific, steady, unhurried quality of someone whose mind had not been invaded by the complication, but was simply processing it and responding. Galen went to this physician and asked him directly, "What is happening inside you when these things happen that allows you to respond the way you respond?" The physician looked at him for a moment and then said, "I stopped a long time ago letting what is outside me determine what is inside me. The outside will always be what it is. The inside is entirely my territory. and I have worked very hard for many years to know my own territory well enough to govern it. Galen spent the rest of his life attempting to do what the physician described. Not perfectly, he was honest about that too, but consistently, earnestly, with the specific quality of someone who has seen the alternative clearly enough to be genuinely motivated to build it. And what he built, over decades of the kind of philosophical practice we are going to discuss today, was exactly what he had seen in the older physician, a mind that was genuinely his own territory, that the outside world entered and moved through and produced its genuine effects in, but that was organized at its center around something stable enough that the effects of the outside did not rearrange the fundamental order of the interior. That is the mind we are building today, from the inside out, with every tool the Stoics developed and refined across centuries of genuine practice. The first thing to understand, before any technique, before any practice, before any specific tool for governing the mind can be genuinely useful, is the foundational Stoic claim about the relationship between the mind and experience, and why it is both more radical and more liberating than most people initially receive it. The claim is this: your experience of your life is not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by what your mind does with what happens to you. The experience, the specific, felt, completely real quality of what it is like to be you living your life, is the product of the mind's construction of the events rather than of the events themselves. This is not the claim that events do not matter. They do. The Stoics were not naive idealists who believed that the external world had no reality or no consequence. Loss is genuinely painful. Injustice is genuinely wrong. Illness is genuinely difficult. These things matter. But here is what the Stoics observed, and what the entire tradition of Stoic philosophical practice is organized around demonstrating. Two people can experience the same objective event and have radically different subjective experiences of it. The same diagnosis, the same financial loss, the same betrayal, the same failure, and one person is destroyed and another is not. One is consumed and another is not. One is made bitter and another is made wiser. The event is the same. The experience is different. And the difference is entirely located in the mind that is processing the event, in the specific, practiced or unpracticed, examined or unexamined, deliberately organized or randomly assembled patterns of thought through which the event passes on its way to becoming experience. If this is true, and the evidence, both philosophical and empirical, is overwhelmingly in favor of it, then the most significant leverage available to any human being who wants to improve the quality of their life is not the changing of their circumstances. It is the training of their mind, the deliberate, patient, daily, philosophically grounded development of the thinking patterns through which everything they experience will pass. Epictetus said it with the directness that characterizes his best teaching. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things. The opinion, the judgment, the interpretation, the meaning the mind assigns is where the disturbance is generated, and the opinion is within the domain of what can be examined, what can be trained, what can be changed. This is the beginning of everything, and it begins with the honest, courageous, completely necessary acknowledgement that the mind you currently have, the specific set of thinking patterns that are currently constructing your experience, is not the mind you are required to keep. It is the mind you have built, mostly without knowing you were building it, from the materials available in the specific environments that shaped it. And it can be rebuilt, deliberately, from different materials, in a different direction. That rebuilding is what the rest of this lesson is about. The first pillar of training the mind is the practice of the pause, the single most important, most practically accessible, and most immediately impactful intervention available in the entire architecture of Stoic mind training. The pause is the deliberate gap between the stimulus and the response, between what happens and what the mind does with what happens, between the event and the interpretation, between the feeling and the action that the feeling produces. Most people have almost no gap. Something happens and the reaction is immediate. The interpretation arrives so fast, and the emotional and behavioral response to the interpretation arrives so fast after that, that the entire sequence feels like a single event rather than the chain of events it actually is. The insult lands and the anger is there,
The bad news arrives and the spiral begins. The unexpected difficulty appears and the stress response is fully activated. It all seems simultaneous. It all seems inevitable. It is not. The sequence is real. The insult, then the interpretation of the insult, then the emotional response to the interpretation of the insult, then the behavioral response to the emotional response. But the individual elements are discrete, and there are gaps between them. They are just, in the untrained mind, extremely small gaps.
Smaller than the speed of conscious thought, which means they are crossed before the conscious mind has any involvement at all. The practice of the pause is the practice of widening those gaps, making them conscious, making them yours, filling them with the quality of honest, examined, deliberate engagement that the untrained mind crosses without noticing. Epictetus described the practice in terms of the suspension of assent, the deliberate withholding of agreement with the first impression the mind produces, not the rejection of the impression, the refusal to immediately act on it as though it were certainly accurate, the holding of it, for a breath, for a moment, for whatever the situation allows, while the examining mind asks, is this accurate? Is this the only available interpretation? Is this what is actually happening? Or is this what my current state, my history, my unexamined patterns are telling me is happening? Marcus Aurelius practiced this so consistently and so completely that it became, over decades, one of the most fundamental qualities of his engagement with the world. Not because he had no reactions. He had strong reactions, and his journals describe them honestly. But because between the reaction and the action, there was always, or almost always, because he was honest about the failures, the pause, the examination, the moment in which the reaction was seen for what it was, rather than simply acted on as though it were the truth. The practice of the pause begins before you need it, in the small provocations, the minor irritations, the low-stakes moments where the gap between stimulus and response does not need to be very large because the stakes of the response are not very high. You practice pausing there. You develop the habit of the breath, the deliberate slowdown, the conscious insertion of even a small gap between what happened and what you do about it. And over time, over the weeks and months of consistent practice in the small moments, the habit of the pause becomes increasingly available in the large moments. Not automatically, not without continued effort, but significantly more available than it would be if the practice had not been built in the small moments. Because the habit of the gap, the specific, practiced quality of not immediately acting on the first impression, has been established in the nervous system through repetition. And established habits are significantly more accessible under pressure than capabilities that have never been practiced. Build the pause in every available small moment, and let the accumulated practice make it available in every large moment that demands it.
The second pillar is the practice of honest interpretation, the specific, demanding, daily practice of examining the automatic interpretations your mind produces and asking, with genuine philosophical rigor, whether they are accurate. The automatic interpretation is not the enemy. It is the mind's best rapid-fire attempt at meaning-making, produced in milliseconds from the pattern recognition machinery that has been developed over a lifetime of experience. It is often partially right. It is often significantly influenced by factors that have nothing to do with the accuracy of the interpretation, and everything to do with the specific fears, wounds, biases, and unexamined assumptions that the pattern recognition machinery has been shaped by. The untrained mind accepts the automatic interpretation as accurate without examination. The trained Stoic mind treats it as a hypothesis, a starting point for the examination rather than the conclusion of it. And the examination asks a series of specific, honest questions that the automatic interpretation never asks of itself. Is this interpretation the only available one? Almost never. Almost every situation that generates a strong automatic interpretation is a situation that admits multiple interpretations, and the automatic one is rarely the most accurate or the most useful available. The colleague who did not respond to your message is in an important meeting, not deliberately ignoring you. The difficult feedback from the person you respect is information about where you can grow, not evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. The unexpected change in plans is an opportunity for adaptability, not proof that the universe is working against you. These alternative interpretations are not wishful thinking. They are not the forced positivity of someone who refuses to see genuine problems. They are the honest, complete, fully evidenced alternatives that the automatic interpretation, shaped by fear and history and the negativity bias that is built into human psychology, does not spontaneously produce. And the practice of deliberately generating and honestly considering these alternatives is one of the most powerful mind training practices available. Is the evidence that supports this interpretation complete? Almost never. The automatic interpretation is built from the evidence that is most readily available, which, due to the selective attention that fear and anxiety produce, is usually the evidence that supports the most threatening interpretation. The evidence that would support a more accurate and less distressing interpretation is present, but not noticed, not weighted, not integrated into the interpretation building process. Galen practiced this in his medical work. When a patient presented with a constellation of symptoms that suggested a frightening diagnosis, he would deliberately look for the evidence that would support a less frightening diagnosis before committing to the frightening one. Not to protect himself from the truth, he was willing to face the truth honestly, but to ensure that the truth he was acting on was the actual truth rather than the fear-shaped interpretation that the automatic mind produced. And he brought the same practice to his personal life. When the automatic mind produced the interpretation that an insult was a deliberate attack on his worth, he would deliberately examine the evidence for the interpretation that the person was simply having a difficult day. When the automatic mind produced the interpretation that a failure was evidence of fundamental incapacity, he would deliberately examine the evidence for the interpretation that the failure was information about what needed to be learned. Practice honest interpretation. Not as an exercise in forced optimism, as the specific, demanding, completely honest practice of ensuring that the interpretation you are living from is the most accurate one available rather than simply the first one that arrived. The third pillar is the complete, daily practice of attention governance, the deliberate, conscious, philosophically grounded direction of what you give your mental focus to, which is the most powerful single determinant of the quality of your inner experience. William James, the father of American psychology, said that the ability to deliberately bring back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. The Stoics said the same thing 2,000 years before James, in different language, with different emphasis, but with the same fundamental recognition that where the mind's attention goes is where the mind's experience is produced. Most people's attention is not governed, it is captured by the most emotionally activating stimulus in the environment, by the most urgent demand in the inbox, by the most anxiety-producing thought in the stream of automatic thoughts that the untrained mind produces continuously, by the social media algorithm that was built by some of the most sophisticated behavioral engineers in history specifically to produce the maximum engagement, which means the maximum capture of attention, regardless of whether the captured attention produces anything good for the person it is captured from. The governed attention is different in every essential way, not because it is impervious to capture, no attention is, but because the person whose attention is governed has developed through specific daily practice the capacity to notice when their attention has been captured and to deliberately, patiently, without excessive drama, redirect it to the object of their own choosing. Marcus Aurelius returned his attention to the present moment so many times across so many years of practice that the return itself became automatic. Not the wandering, the mind always wanders, even the most practiced philosophical mind, but the return, the specific, gentle, completely non-dramatic recognition, I have wandered, I return. Without shame about the wandering, without drama about the return, simply, quietly, with the patient persistence of someone who has done this enough times to know that the return is always available and that the returning is always the practice. The practice of attention governance has 3 specific elements that the Stoics identified and that modern attention research has confirmed. The first is the morning commitment to where the attention will go. Before the day begins, you make the specific, deliberate decision about what deserves the focused, governed quality of your attention today. Not a general intention, a specific commitment. This project for this block of time. This relationship for this conversation. This practice for this period. The specificity of the commitment is what makes the governance possible, because you cannot govern attention toward a vague destination.
The second is the practice of single tasking, the complete, deliberate, philosophically grounded commitment to giving one thing at a time the full quality of your attention, rather than the fragmented, distracted, perpetually interrupted quality of attention that multitasking produces. The mind that is trying to attend to multiple things simultaneously is not attending well to any of them. It is producing the appearance of attention through rapid switching, a process that is significantly more cognitively expensive, significantly less productive, and significantly more stressful than the single-focused, fully present engagement with one thing at a time. The third is the practice of returning, the specific, non-dramatic, completely patient practice of bringing the attention back when it wanders without the self-criticism that makes the wandering into a bigger event than the wandering itself. The attention will wander, always. The question is not how to prevent the wandering, but how to shorten the time between the wandering and the return. And the practice of gentle, patient, consistent returning is what shortens that time over weeks and months of daily practice. Govern your attention. It is the most powerful thing you can govern. And the governance of it changes the quality of your experience more immediately and more dramatically than the changing of any external circumstance could. The fourth pillar is the practice of emotional examination, the specific, Stoic-grounded practice of engaging honestly with your emotional experience rather than either suppressing it or being governed by it, and discovering in that engagement the specific information it contains and the specific freedom it offers. Emotions are not the enemy of the Stoic mind. This bears repeating because the caricature of Stoicism, the stone-faced, emotionally disconnected, perpetually unaffected robot, is almost the opposite of the actual Stoic ideal. The Stoics felt deeply. Marcus Aurelius grieved genuinely. Seneca loved his friends with an intensity that fills his letters with warmth. Epictetus spoke about the suffering of others with a compassion that was fierce and personal. What the Stoics were not was governed by their emotions, and the specific practice that prevents emotional governance without requiring emotional suppression is emotional examination, the honest, curious, completely non-performative engagement with what the emotion is, where it came from, what it is genuinely telling you, and whether the interpretation that produced it is accurate. When an emotion arises, any significant emotion, but especially the negative ones that most people either suppress or are swept away by, the Stoic practice is to stop. To sit with the emotion rather than immediately acting on it or immediately suppressing it. To observe it with the same quality of honest curiosity that Galen brought to the examination of symptoms. And to ask the specific practical questions that turn the emotion from a governing force into a source of information. What is this emotion? Can you name it specifically? Not just bad or upset, but the specific quality of what is being felt. Fear, anger, grief, shame, loneliness. The specific naming is significant because emotions that are precisely named are significantly easier to examine than emotions that are vaguely experienced.
The research on this, conducted under the name affect labeling, shows that the precise naming of an emotion significantly reduces its physiological intensity, not by denying it, by engaging with it accurately. What is this emotion telling me?
Every significant emotion contains genuine information. The anger that signals a genuine injustice, the fear that signals a genuine risk, the grief that signals a genuine loss, the shame that signals a genuine violation of your own values. What is the genuine information in this specific emotion right now? Is the interpretation that produced this emotion accurate? Because the emotion is produced by the interpretation, and the interpretation may not be accurate. The anger may be genuine, and its signal may be valid, but the interpretation of who's responsible and what they intended may be incorrect. The fear may be genuine, but its assessment of the probability and severity of the threat may be exaggerated. The shame may be genuine, but its verdict on your permanent worth rather than your specific recent behavior may be unjust. The examination of the emotion through these questions does not make the emotion disappear, but it transforms it from a force that is governing your behavior into a source of information that you are governing. And that transformation, from governed to governing, is one of the most fundamental expressions of what the Stoics meant by the examined life. The fifth pillar is the practice of present moment inhabiting, the specific, daily, Stoic-grounded practice of being genuinely present in the actual moment that is actually happening, rather than in the past that is over, or the future that is not yet arrived. The mind, in its untrained state, almost never inhabits the present. It visits the present briefly, on its way between the rumination of the past and the anxiety of the future. It registers what is happening now only enough to process the stimulus and produce the reaction before returning to the more chronic occupation of what happened and what might happen. The cost of this chronic absence from the present is one of the most significant and least recognized sources of the unnecessary suffering that most people experience. Because the present, the actual, literal, immediate present, almost never contains what the anxious, future-dwelling or the ruminating past-dwelling mind is producing. The catastrophe that the anxiety is preparing for almost never arrives in the form the anxiety has been imagining. The regret that the rumination is dwelling in cannot be changed by the dwelling. The present moment, faced directly and completely, is almost always significantly more manageable than the manufactured experience of what might happen or what already happened that the wandering mind substitutes for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this with the most practical, most immediate language in his journals. He did not write about presence as a spiritual achievement. He wrote about it as a daily, practical, sometimes hourly intervention, the deliberate return of his attention from wherever it had wandered to the specific, concrete, completely real reality of what was actually happening right now. He called it confining yourself to the present, not as a limitation, as the most liberating possible relationship with time, the relationship of someone who is actually here, actually available, actually fully resourced in the only moment where genuine engagement is possible.
The practice of present moment inhabiting is the practice of returning, the same returning that is the core of attention governance applied specifically to the temporal dimension. When you notice that your mind has traveled to the past, to the replay, the regret, the endless rehearsal of what should have been different, you return. When you notice that your mind has traveled to the future, to the anxious anticipation, the catastrophic projection, the desperate attempt to manage outcomes that have not yet arrived, you return. Gently, without drama, without self-criticism for the travel, with the patient, practiced, completely real quality of someone who has been doing this returning long enough to know that the present is always where the genuine life is happening, and that the genuine life deserves the full quality of your presence rather than the partial, distracted, perpetually elsewhere quality of a mind that is always on its way somewhere else. Galen discovered this practice in the middle of his medical career when a period of professional difficulty produced the specific, familiar, completely unnecessary suffering of a mind that was simultaneously dwelling on past failures and anticipating future ones, without being fully present for the actual work of the actual day that was the only territory where anything useful could actually happen. And the recognition, dramatic in its simplicity, completely liberating in its implication, that the present moment was the only territory where genuine action was possible, and that genuine action was the only thing that would address both the past failures and the future fears, was the beginning of his most productive period as a physician and a thinker. Be here. It is the most radical act available, and it requires nothing except the return, again and again, to the only moment that is ever actually real. The sixth pillar is the practice of cognitive reframing, the specific, well-documented, philosophically grounded practice of deliberately choosing the interpretation of events that is most accurate, most useful, and most consistent with your genuine values, rather than simply accepting the first interpretation the automatic mind produces. Reframing is not positive thinking. This distinction matters because the conflation of the two leads to one of the most persistent misapplications of an otherwise powerful practice. Positive thinking is the replacement of accurate negative interpretations with inaccurate positive ones, the insistence on seeing the silver lining, whether or not a silver lining actually exists. It is a form of self-deception that eventually collapses under the weight of the reality it is denying. Reframing is the deliberate search for the most accurate interpretation available, which, for most of the events that the automatic mind interprets most negatively, turns out to be significantly less negative than the automatic interpretation, not because the situation has been dishonestly improved, but because the automatic interpretation is typically less accurate than the examined one. The obstacle that has appeared in the path to your goal, the automatic mind interprets this as evidence of the goal's impossibility, as a signal from the universe that this particular path is not yours, as a reason to stop. The reframe, examined honestly, reveals it as information about what this stage of the journey requires you to develop,
as the specific resistance that produces the specific strength the goal requires, as the Stoic teaching that Marcus Aurelius articulated in one of the most frequently quoted passages in his journals: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The criticism you received, the automatic mind interprets this as an attack on your worth, as evidence of your inadequacy, as the judgment of someone who has seen what you are really like and found it wanting. The reframe, examined honestly, reveals it as information about how your work is landing, as an opportunity to understand how the gap between your intention and your impact can be closed, as the specific feedback that improvement requires. The failure. The automatic mind interprets this as proof of limitation, as the definitive answer to the question of whether you have what it takes, as the data point that the careful observer was waiting for to confirm what they suspected all along. The reframe, examined honestly, reveals it as the most accurate and the most specific information available about what needs to be done differently, as the evidence of genuine attempt rather than the verdict of permanent inability, as the curriculum that the smooth and uninterrupted success never provides. Practice reframing daily, not as the forced replacement of honest negative assessment with dishonest positive spin, as the genuine, philosophically serious, completely honest search for the interpretation of your circumstances that is most accurate and most useful, which almost always involves significantly more possibility and significantly more agency than the automatic interpretation suggests. The seventh pillar is the complete practical management of the thinking patterns that produce anxiety, the specific, daily, Stoic-grounded practice of catching the anxiety-producing thought before it produces the full cascade of the anxiety experience, and examining it at the source rather than attempting to manage it after it has flooded the system. Anxiety is produced by a specific thinking pattern, the confident prediction of a negative future outcome, held as though it were far more certain than the actual evidence warrants, combined with the assessment that the predicted negative outcome would be genuinely catastrophic rather than genuinely difficult but manageable. Both elements of this pattern, the overcertainty about the negative prediction and the catastrophization of its impact, are amenable to examination, and the examination, conducted before the prediction has been held long enough to produce the full physiological cascade of the anxiety response, is significantly more effective than any management strategy applied after the cascade is fully underway. The overcertainty examination asks, what is the actual probability of this outcome? Not the feared probability, the anxious mind's probability estimate, which is almost always dramatically higher than the actual base rate for this kind of outcome in situations like this one. The actual probability, assessed as honestly as possible from whatever evidence is genuinely available. And in the honest examination of most anxiety-producing predictions, the actual probability is significantly lower than the feared probability, low enough that the specific quality of preparation is warranted, but the full cascade of anxiety is not.
The catastrophization examination asks, if this outcome actually occurred, what would actually happen? Not the imagined version, the disaster scenario that anxiety constructs, which typically involves a cascade of increasingly terrible consequences that expand beyond any honest assessment of the actual implications. The actual consequences, examined honestly. What would actually be different? What resources would actually be available for managing the difference? What evidence from your own actual history suggests that this kind of outcome, while genuinely unpleasant, would actually be survivable and manageable rather than catastrophic and unsurvivable? Galen applied these examinations to his own anxiety about the outcomes of difficult medical cases, not to make himself indifferent to the outcomes. He was never indifferent, and the care for his patients' outcomes was one of the driving qualities of his practice, but to release the anxiety that consumed his focus and his energy without contributing to the outcome in any useful way. Because the anxiety, once examined honestly, revealed itself as a poorly calibrated threat response to a situation that was genuinely serious, but not genuinely unsurvivable. And the release of the anxiety, through the specific, honest examination of both its overcertainty and its catastrophization, freed the cognitive resources that the anxiety was consuming for the actual, practical, focused work of addressing the situation as effectively as possible. Practice the anxiety examination. Catch the anxiety-producing thought at the source. Examine its probability estimate and its catastrophization honestly, and discover, as Galen discovered and as the Stoics taught, and as every person who genuinely practices this examination eventually confirms, that the mind can be genuinely relaxed in the face of genuine difficulty when the difficulty is seen clearly rather than through the distorting lens of unchallenged anxiety. The eighth pillar is the deliberate, daily cultivation of the thinking patterns that produce genuine well-being. The positive practices, as distinct from the corrective practices of the previous pillars, that build the specific interior quality that the Stoics considered the natural expression of the well-trained mind. Genuine well-being, the specific, felt, completely real quality of the mind that is functioning as it was designed to function, organized around genuine values, engaged genuinely with the actual present, free from the specific distortions that the untrained mind produces, is not the absence of negative thinking. It is the presence of something positive. The specific qualities that the Stoics identified as the natural expressions of the philosophical life: gratitude, curiosity, genuine engagement, connection, the specific satisfaction of work done well and values honored consistently. The cultivation of gratitude is the first. Not as a performance, not the gratitude list that becomes a ritual without meaning. The genuine, specific, daily practice of noticing what is actually present in your life that is genuinely worth noticing. Marcus Aurelius began his journals with lists of the specific people and the specific qualities he had encountered in his life that were worth being grateful for. Not generic gratitude for abstract goods. Specific gratitude for specific gifts. The patience of the specific teacher. The honesty of the specific friend.
The opportunity presented by the specific circumstance. The specific quality of the specific morning light. The cultivation of curiosity is the second. The deliberate maintenance of genuine interest in the world, in the people, the ideas, the problems, the ongoing surprise of what reality turns out to contain when it is engaged with genuinely, rather than processed through the filter of what is already known. Galen maintained curiosity his entire life. Genuine, active, never satisfied curiosity about the body, about health, about the mechanisms underlying what he was observing, and it was one of the most significant contributors to both the quality of his work and the quality of his experience. The cultivation of connection is the third. the deliberate, specific, genuinely engaged investment in the relationships that are genuinely restorative, the conversations that are honestly mutual, the friendships that are genuinely reciprocal, the specific, warm, completely real quality of genuine human presence offered and received. Not the social performance, the genuine thing. Build these positive patterns, not as the replacement of the corrective work, but as its completion. Because the mind that has been trained to examine its distortions needs something to train itself toward as well. And what it trains itself toward, the specific, daily, consistently chosen orientation of the well-trained mind, is exactly these qualities: the genuine gratitude, the genuine curiosity, the genuine connection, the genuine engagement with the actual life that is actually happening.
The ninth pillar is the complete integration of all the practices into the daily, breathing, completely real expression of a mind that has genuinely begun to be its own territory, that is genuinely governed from inside rather than determined from outside. The morning practice of the governed mind begins in silence. Not long silence. 5 minutes is transformative compared to the alternative, but genuine silence. The specific, deliberate, completely private quality of a mind that is given the opportunity to settle before the day's demands begin their claims. In that silence, you meet your own mind, not the reactive, externally shaped mind that the busy day produces, but the settled, centered, genuinely examined mind that the silence and the practice reveal. You set the day's intention, not the tasks. The tasks are managed elsewhere. The mental intention, the specific quality of thinking you are committing to today. The pause before the reaction, the examination before the interpretation, the return to the present when the mind travels to the past or the future, the honest reframe when the automatic interpretation is distorted. These are the commitments of the governed mind for this specific day. The midday check-in is the brief, honest assessment of how the morning's commitments held. Where did the mind govern itself? Where was it captured? What specific adjustment will the afternoon practice reflect? Not a lengthy examination, 3 minutes is sufficient, but honest, specific, forward-looking. The evening review is the Stoic practice that ties everything together. Before sleep, you sit with the day's mind. Not harshly, the examination is curious rather than condemning, but honestly. Where did the pause happen? Where did it not? Where was the interpretation examined? Where was it accepted uncritically? Where was the attention governed? Where was it captured? Where was the present moment inhabited? Where was the mind elsewhere? And, crucially, what was there to be genuinely grateful for today? What was there to be genuinely curious about? What quality of genuine connection was available and received? Because the positive practices are as important as the corrective ones, and the evening review that catalogs only the failures without acknowledging the genuine goods is as distorted in its own way as the automatic mind that it is working to correct. Galen maintained this practice for the last 30 years of his life. Not perfectly, he was consistently honest that his practice of the examined mind was a practice in progress rather than an achievement complete, but consistently, with the specific, quiet, completely unglamorous quality of someone who had seen what the governed mind could produce and had decided that the daily, imperfect, earnest work of building it was the most important work available to him. And what he built, what every person who genuinely practices this builds over the weeks and months and years of honest, daily, completely real engagement, is the specific, felt, completely unmistakable quality of a mind that is gradually becoming more genuinely its own territory, that is gradually doing what the philosopher described, governing itself rather than simply registering what the outside world produces in it. That is the relaxation that starts in the mind. Not the shallow relaxation of distraction or the desperate relaxation of exhaustion.
The deep, earned, philosophically genuine relaxation of a mind that has learned to see clearly and has discovered that what is actually there, seen clearly, rather than through the distorting lens of the untrained mind's construction of it, is significantly more manageable, more full of possibility, and more genuinely worth inhabiting than the mind's previous construction of it ever suggested. Everything starts in the mind. The suffering and the peace, the prison and the freedom, the life that is happening to you and the life that you are genuinely living. The mind is your territory. Begin to know it,
begin to govern it, and discover what becomes possible when the most powerful thing available to you is finally, genuinely, completely yours. Subscribe to the Stoic Mindset right now, because this channel is where the complete, daily, genuinely applicable practice of training the mind that the Stoics developed across centuries of genuine philosophical practice is brought to you week after week, with the full depth and the full honesty and the full practical applicability that the practice actually requires. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell notification so that every new lesson reaches you the moment it is released. Every week on this channel, we go all the way into the ancient wisdom, into the practical architecture, into the honest, daily, completely real work of building a mind that is genuinely your own territory. The people who find this channel and stay are the people who have understood the most fundamental thing available: that the quality of the inner life determines the quality of the outer life, that everything starts in the mind, and that the work of training the mind is therefore the most important work available. Subscribe right now. Share this with someone whose mind needs to find its own governance. Come back for the next lesson, because what we are building here together is the most powerful thing a human being can build: the governed, examined, genuinely free mind from which the genuinely free life is the natural expression. And it starts exactly here, exactly now, in the mind that is reading these words and deciding what to do with them.